It seems that we have time travel back to 1925. I don't know, we could be on the border with Morocco, we could be in Algeria with the Senegalese terrorleurs. But anyway, today we're gonna cover the Rif War. It is seen as the last colonial war, it is seen as a war beyond measure, and it is seen, well, it has seen a lot of things and it has a lot of parallels, like, of course, the war in Afghanistan with the desert, the war in Vietnam with the unpopularity and sluggishness, the war, well, guerrilla warfare and all that good stuff, the war of 2003 with the invasion and being unpopular. It also mirrors the Korean War, as it was a stalemate for almost like most of the war itself. Most of the war was pretty much the stalemate of Malina. But with anyway, I would not spoil it too much, but this is a war that actually has a lot of interesting and lasting consequences for not only Africa, but the colonial history as we would see it, and of course Morocco with their thing with the Western Sahalis, and of course Spain, losing their last and final protectorate and last colony, and finally being not a great power anymore. It would lead to the Civil War. It would lead to World War II. Not really, but it would see France on its last legs and its last colonial war. No, the Algeria. Well, Spain's last colonial war. Anyway, it is seen as the last colonial war to actually assert dominance over the region. That's why it's a colonial war, not a colonial war for independence. It's the last war to actually put control over the people. But anyway, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this feature presentation of the Rif. I hope you learned something. I hope you like it. I got like another 30 seconds because I put it at 2:30 just in case I had a lot of things to say. But apparently I don't have a lot to say, so with that being said, I hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something, and prepare for feature presentation, the Rif War, the last colonial war, the war of the last Spanish great success, kinda. Enjoy. So during the early 20th century, Morocco was divided into protectorates ruled by France and Spain. The Rif region had been assigned to Spain, but given to the Sultans of Morocco, which had been unable to exert control over the region. Spanish sovereignty over the Rif was strictly theoretical. For centuries, the Berber tribes of the Rif had fought off any attempts of outsiders to impose control on them. For centuries, Europeans had seen the Rif Mountains and the people in the mountains from ships in the Mediterranean Sea, but almost no European had ever ventured into the area. Walter Burton Harris, the Moroccan correspondent for The Times, who covered the war, wrote that as late as 1912, only 1 or 2 Europeans had been able to visit the cedar forests that lie south of Fez. A few have traveled to the southern Atlas and pushed into the Sus, or Sassi Baka, and that was almost all. As Harris wrote, the Berbers were often as inhospitable to Arabs as they were to foreigners, and generally killed any outsider who ventured into their territory. Vincent Sheen, who covered the war for the New York Times, wrote that the Rif War was a truly beautiful countryside, of crimson mountains flowing against a sky of heretic blue, gorgeous, magnificent, and terrifying, peaceful green valleys between the protecting precipice, right? A place that reminded him of his native Colorado. The Rif was also a high The Rif was also high in high-grade and high-rich iron. The Rif was also rich in high-grade iron, which could be easily extracted via open-pit mining. The promise of the Spanish state collecting revenues in the form of taxes and royalties from iron mining here were an incentive for it to become the Rif and have the Rif under its full control and sovereignty. The Crown granted the concession of the mining to the Rif. The Crown granted the concession to mine iron. Oh yeah, because that worked out very well the last time they gave concessions to somebody. To the Rif to the millionaire Don Horacio Echevarria, or Echevarria. By 1920, he had brought out 80,000 tons of valuable high-grade iron, though relatively inexpensive in open-pit mining, and through relatively inexpensive open-pit mining. Though profitable, iron mining caused much environmental damage and required the displacement of native people, as much material extraction would imply. As they received no shares in the profits, the Rifians soon began to oppose the mining of their territory. When King Alfonso the X 111567 Alfonso the Eighth of Spain ascended to the throne in 1886, Spain was considered a world power, with colonies in the America, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. But the Spanish-American War lost their last holdings in the Americas with the loss of Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. And in 1889, it sold the Marina and the Carolina Islands to Germany, which were promptly given to Britain. And by given, I mean like invaded. Basically, retaining only small footholds on Morocco and the Moroccan coast, with Melilla and the other one, or Catalonia, and of course, Spanish or Equatorial Guinea. To compensate for the loss of the empires in the Americas and Asia, and barely having like two small, no bigger than actual Spain itself colonies in Africa, there emerged a powerful Africanist faction in the Spanish Parliament and in Spain itself, led by Alfonso VIII himself, who wanted a new empire, but in Africa. Finally, the Roman Catholic Church was politically powerful in Spain, and much of the Spanish clergy actually preached the need for a new crusade to continue the Requisition by conquering Morocco from the heretic Islam, thus adding to the voices of the Africanist choir, but only for like, you know, the Muslims, the sub-Saharan Africans could do whatever they want. For all of these reasons, Spain began to actually push into the Rif as early as 1909. The Rifian forces. Forces involved. The Berber tribesmen had a long tradition of fierce fighting skills, combined with high standards of fieldcraft and even marksmanship. They were capable and were capably led by Ibn el-Krim or Karim, who showed both military and political expertise and prowess. However, the Rifian regular army was never a very large force to begin with, as they were nomads themselves. So, hey, Karim! Yes, Abdul. Hey, the family just wanted some water, man. We're like 5,000 miles away. You know, you're our neighbors. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's literally how far apart they lived again. The elites of the Rifian forces formed regular units, which, according to Ibn el-Krim, and quoted by a Spanish general, Manuel Gode, numbered 6,000 to 7,000. Other sources put it much lower at about 2,000 to 3,000, but basically no more than 10,000. The Romanian Rifians were tribal militias selected by their cadis, or the village heads or chiefs like that. They were not liable to serve away from their homes or farms for more than 15 consecutive days. 15, like 2 weeks. General Godi estimated that at their peak in 1924, June, the Rifian forces were about 80,000 men, although Ibn el-Krim was never able to arm more than 20,000 men at a time. However, this force was largely adequate for the early stages of the war, when the Spanish garrison only numbered about a small protection force because they thought the massive machine gun was the penultimate linchpin. and Karim had artillery, so that was, bad. However, this force was, in the final days of the war, the Rifian forces numbered about 12,000 men. In addition, the Rifian forces were not well armed. With the weapons that they did have, they were badly maintained and in poor condition. And I don't mean like not like desert bad, I mean like bad, like terrible. Not like desert bad. The Spanish forces. Vámonos. Initially, the Spanish forces in Morocco were largely comprised of conscripts and reservists, not revisionists, from Spain itself. These peninsular troops, or the Peninsulares troops, were poorly supplied and actually prepared as the Rifians themselves, but this is the beginning and then at the end they're much better. Few had marksman skills and proper battle training, and widespread corruption of the forces were reported among the officer corps, reducing the supplies and the morale, as one could actually buy officership, and unlike Britain, which does have this, there's some merit to actually get there. You can't just pay 1 million gabillion pounds. You actually have to have a little inkling of skill. A little bit. Not like a lot, but more than Spain. One of the Spanish troops in Morocco in 1921, well over half of the Spanish troops in Morocco in 1921, over half were completely illiterate conscripts from the poorest elements of Spanish society, even Catalonia and the Basque Country, who had been sent to Morocco with minimum and minimal training. Despite the assurances from General Manuel Fernandez Silvestre that his equipment was sufficient to defeat the Rifians, in fact, about 3/4 of the rifles of the Melina arsenal were shoddy condition and were pretty much like Rumsat 1884 condition, due to poor maintenance, never really having to use them, and sand. And a report from late 1920, which Spanish commanders never bothered to read, warned that many of the rifles held there were actually either unusable or more a danger to the soldiers firing them than to the enemy itself, because they were that bad, they would like literally blow up, like freaking Far Cry 2, dude. The average Spanish soldier in Morocco in 1921 was paid an equivalent of 34 US cents per day and lived on a simple diet of coffee, bread, beans, rice, and an odd piece of meat. I will not tell you the mystery meat. Get the camel, get the camel. Many soldiers actually resorted to bartering their rifles and ammunition to the local markets in exchange for fresh vegetables. Not even like a sandwich, but fresh vegetables. The barracks that the soldiers lived in were on sanitary and medical care for the few hospitals that were actually there were very poor. Up in the mountains, Spanish soldiers lived on a small outpost known as the Bolocas, which the American historian Stanley Paynes observed. Many of these lack any sort of toilet, and the soldiers who ventured out to the filthy bunker actually risked exposure to fire or lurking tribesmen. Yes, fire. Like actual fire. Continuing the practice first began in Cuba, corruption flourished among the venal Spanish officers and the officer corps, with goods meant for the troops being sold on the black market, and the funds intended to build roads and railroads in Morocco ending up in the pockets of senior officers. Because, you want the Moroccans not to feel that exploited, so you invest in the colony a little bit, but the Spanish officers never got the memo. We do not care, we just like money. Peso, my friend. A high number of Spanish officers could actually not read maps while being actually intelligent, which explains why Spanish units so frequently got lost in the Rif Mountains. Hey, Carlos, what do you want, Espacitos? I feel we're lost in the mountains, man. What do you mean? I'm a good Spanish officer, how could we be lost in the mountain? And I sound a little Italian, but don't worry, it's Spanish, trust me. Well, signor, we are lost. Quello godito se le montañas. Ah, quello si miracles. ¿Qué? In general, studying war was not actually considered to be a good use of an officer's time, and most officers devoted their time in Melina, in the words of the American journalist James Perry, to gambling and whoring, sometimes molesting the native Moorish women as well. Because that's a good time, guys. It really is, isn't it, huh? Really tough, man. Well, we can kind of see who's the bad guys here, right? So let's continue on. Not the men on the ground, the officers. Morale in the army was extremely poor, and most Spanish soldiers just wanted to go home and leave Morocco forever. Out here it's hot, out here it's sweltering, man. I'm tired of this shit, man. Because of the prostitutes from Spain, who attracted themselves and who attached themselves in great numbers to the Spanish bases in Morocco, venereal diseases, not venereal diseases, were rampant in the Spanish army. Fernandez Salatres was well aware of the poor morale of his soldiers, but did not regard this as a problem, believing that his enemy was so inferior that the problems afflicting his troops were not to be an issue. We got the Mexican machine gun, we just go blam blam blam, man. This okay, Jose. Even with their numerical and even sometimes technological superiority when the actual people actually wanted to spend money, the Peninsular or the Peninsulada troops proved to be no match for the highly skilled and highly motivated Rifian forces. Accordingly, much reliance came to be placed on the mainly professional unit comprising of Spain's Army of Africa, or the Africa de Army, or something like that, the Armadas de Africa. Since 1911, these had included regiments of the Moroccan Regulares, or the regulars, who proved to be excellent soldiers. Franco, get up here. You see, we must defend this perimeter. Okay, boss. Soon you'll be Generalissimo one day. Soon, my son. You be patient. Aye, sir. I believe I will. The initiative was unpopular in parts of Spain as well, and probably like 70%. In 1909, during the early conflict with the Rif tribesmen, an attempt by the Spanish government to call up reservists led to a working class uprising in Barcelona, known as the Tragic Week. The Catalan trade unions, led by mostly anarchists, argued that the working class in Barcelona had no quarrels with the people of the Rif. Why are we going to fight a war 20 miles from home, man? Why are we fighting people in the jungle? No, wait, the desert, man. After the Tragic Week of 1909, the Spanish government started in 1911, and starting in 1911, tried to raise as many regular units or regulares units as possible in order to avoid further working class resentment and resistance to the colonial war. As much as possible, for the Spanish working class had no desire to see their sons and daughters, as nurses, sent to Morocco to die of heat stroke before they died of a bullet by a Rifian tribesmen. Beginning a policy of what the Spanish historian Jose Alveras called the Moroccanizing of the conquest of the Rif, or Vietnamization, if you will, or Arabization, or Afghanistization, and letting the Moroccans fight and kind of subjugate themselves. Following the difficulties and the setbacks that they had experienced in 1909 and 1911, the Spanish army began to adopt much of the organization and the tactics from the French North African forces, garrisoning most of Morocco and especially their colony and their linchpin and crown jewel, Algeria. Particular attention was paid to the French Foreign Legion, or the Légion de Front de la Français, something like that. Let me see. And the Front de Légion de Français. Something like that. Don't kill me, French people, please. And a Spanish equivalent, which was the Tercio de Extranjeros, or the Foreigners Brigade, known in English as the Spanish Legion, was formed in 1920. The regiment's second in command was then Colonel Francisco Franco, somebody that would probably not make something for themselves later on in life. But for now, he's just a low-level colonel. I don't really know the kid that well, so he might grow up to be something like a dictator or a phalangerist someday. Who knows? Whatever. Having risen rapidly through the ranks of that year. In the Rif War, it was the Regulares and the Spanish Foreign Legion, or the Tercio de Extranjeros, that was founded in 1919, that proved to be the elite forces that won Spain the war. Less than 25% of this Foreign Legion were in fact non-Spanish. hastily disciplined and driven, then quickly acquired a reputation for ruthlessness and bloodlust, or holding out their position unlike the Spanish conscripts. As their numbers grew, the Spanish Legion and the Aguilares increasingly led offensive operations after the disasters that had been suffered by the conscript forces early in the war in 1920 to 1924. But these are the two main forces. The Riffians on one side fighting their anti-colonial dream, and the Spanish on the other side bribing, whoring, and probably fighting with the Regulares on the other. Now, the early stages of the war. As an outcome of the Treaty of Fez in 1912, Spain gained possessions of the land around Molina and Ceuta, which are still whole to this day. In 1920, the Spanish commissioner, General Damasio Berenguer, decided to conquer the eastern territory from the Jalaba tribe, but had little success. The second in command was General Manuel Fernandez Silvestre, who commanded the eastern sector of Morocco. Fernandez Silvestre, or Silvestre. Fernandez Silvestre has spread his troops into 144 forts and balacos from Sidi Dares to the Mediterranean across the Rif Mountains to Anuela and Tizi Azara, or Azab, and on the coast and on the border with Molina, which is technically a border, so yes. Fernandez Silvestre, known for his boldness and impostuity or toughness, had pushed his men too deep into the Rif Mountains, hoping to reach the Alchumas Bay, without taking the necessary work to build the logistical support network capable of supplying his men out of the Balakos up into the Rif Mountains. Karim had sent Fernandez Silvestre a letter warning him not to cross the Amikran River or else he would die. Fernandez Silvestre commented to the Spanish press about the letter that, "This man, Eb el Krim, is crazy. I'm not going to take serious the threats of a little Berber Cadi, or the judge, who I have at my mercy a short time ago. His insolence merits a new punishment." And that's like raw hardcore Spain. Like, that's raw. That's Spanish, dude. That's Spanish. That is like the Spanish. Karim allowed Fernandez Silvestre to advance deep into the Rif, knowing the Spanish logistical support were, in the words of the Spanish historian Johes Alveras, tenuous at best. On the 1st of July 1921, the Spanish army in northern eastern Morocco under Fernandez Silvestre collapsed when they were defeated by the forces of Eb el Krim in what became known as, well, in Spain, as the disaster at Anuel, or the disaster of Anuel. Some 8,000 soldiers and officers were reported killed or disappeared out of some 20,000, so almost 45% of his fighting force. The final Spanish death toll, both at Anuel and during the subsequent rout that took the Riffian forces to the outskirts of Molina, were reported by the Cortes Generales as totaling as well over 13,192 people killed, Spanish killed. The Spanish were pushed back, and during the following 5 years, occasionally battles were fought between the two. The Riffian forces actually advanced to the east and captured over 130 Spanish military outposts, or balacos. By late August 1921, not even 4 months in, Spain lost all of the territory it had gained since 1909. Spanish troops were being pushed back to Molina, which was their biggest base in the eastern Rif. Spain still had 14,000 soldiers in Molina. However, Eb el Krim ordered his forces not to attack the town. He subsequently told the writer J. Roger Metanu that since citizens of the other European nations were residing in Molina, it was a fear they would intervene in the war should a citizen come to harm, even a scratch. Other reasons include the dispersal of Riffian fighters from several loosely allied tribes following the victory of Anuel. and the arrival in Melilla of subsequent reinforcements from the Legion and other Spanish units recalled from operations in the western Morocco were just enough to keep them at bay. By the end of August, Spanish forces in Melilla numbered about 30,000, under General José San Jurajo, which was another guy that would probably do something, you know? Not too sure, unless that's the wrong guy. And a slow process of recovering the lost territory could finally begin at last. Thus the Spanish could keep their biggest base in the eastern Rif, and later Ibn el-Krim would admit, "I bitterly regret this order. It was my biggest mistake. It was like a Dunkirk to me before a Dunkirk was possible. All of the following 10 years of events happened because of my and this mistake." In January 1922, the Spanish had retaken their major fort in Monte Arati, where they found the bodies of 2,600 of the garrison, and had reoccupied the coastal plains as far flung as Tistuin and Batal. The Rifian forces had consolidated their hold on the inland mountains, and stalemate were reached, like the Korean War. Yeah, I'm gonna point out historical relevance. Yeah? The Spanish military suffered losses even at sea. In March, the transport ship Juan de Jose was sunken in Al-Hushmas Bay by Rifian coastal battery, and in August 1923, the battleship Hispania ran aground off of the Cape de Tours de Forces and was eventually scrapped in Suti. In a bid to break the stalemate, the Spanish military turned to the use of chemical weapons against the Rifians. The Rif War has starkly polarized the Spanish society between the Afrikaners, who wanted to conquer an empire in Africa, versus the Abandonistas, or the Abandonists, who wanted to abandon Morocco as it was not worth the blood and the treasure, which was just iron. After the disaster of Anuel, the Spain's war in the Rif went bad to worse, as the Spanish were barely hanging on to Morocco. Support for the Abandonists grew as many people could see no point in the war. And let's just keep Equatorial Guinea, man. The Africans are kind of cool, you know? The sub-Saharan Africans, sorry. In August 1923, Spanish soldiers embarking for Morocco mutinied at a railway station. Other soldiers in Malanga simply refused to board the ships that were to take them to Morocco to die. While in Barcelona, huge crowds of left-wingers had staged anti-war protests, at which Spanish flags were burned, while the flags of the Rif Republic were waved about. Kinda like the Iraq War, what the hell's going on? With the Afrikaners only comprising a minority in Spain, it was clear that it was only a matter of time before the Abandonistas forced the Spanish government and forced Spain to give up on the Rif, which was actually part of the reason for the military coup d'etat in 1923. On the 13th of September 1923, General Miguel Primo de la Vera, second Marqués de Estada, seized power in a military coup of Spain. I don't know how you could overthrow a king. No, I think they were a republic, no? Anyway, General Primo de Rivera was, in his words to the American journalist James Perry, a moderate dictator who was actually convinced that the divisions between the Afrikanists and the Abandonists had pushed Spain to the brink of civil war. Oh, trust me, not this, but soon. And who had seized power to find a way out of the crisis. I can't really branch off, you know? General Primo de la Vera soon concluded that the war was unwinnable and considered pulling back his troops to the coast with the aim of at least temporarily abandoning the Rif for right now. In late July 1924, Primo de la Vera visited a Spanish Foreign Legion post in Ben Tarib in the Rif, and was served a banquet of eggs in different forms. In Spanish culture, eggs were a symbol of testicles, and the dishes were intended to send a clear message. Here to sucks balls, man. Primo de la Vera responded calmly that the army would be required to abandon only a minimal territory and only minimal of the territory, and that the junior officers should not dictate the measures necessary to resolve the Moroccan problem. However, he subsequently modified the plans for withdrawal, pulling the Spanish forces back to the Charouine and the Wadlou region to prepare for a fortified boundary named the Primo Line, Why do all the dictators that have defensive must name their line after them? Sure you want to be like the Germans, but at least the Germans knew what they were doing. Mannerheim line, the Metaxas line, the Apollophagus line, the Mussolini line, the Hitler line. No, it was the seawall. My bad. The French are here, the French intervention. In May 1924, the Spanish army had established a line of outposts north of the Uragada River in disputed tribal territory. On the 12th of April 1925, an estimated 8,000 Riffians attacked this line, and 2 weeks later, over 40 to 66 French outposts had been stormed or abandoned, thinking that they were Spanish. French casualties exerted and exceeded 1,000 killed, 3,700 wounded, and 1,000 missing, representing losses of over 20% of their forces deployed in that part of the Rif. The French accordingly intervened on the side of Spain, as, European buddies, colonial stuff, and if they think they could win in the Rif, it might influence Algeria, stuff like that, and appointed Marshal Pétain as the commander-in-chief of an expeditionary force of up to 160,000 well-trained and well-equipped troops from the Metropolitan, Algerian, Senegalese, and foreign legions, as well as the Moroccan regulars, or Toreros, and the auxiliaries, Guerilleros. With the Spanish forces at this point numbering about 90,000, the Riffian forces were now seriously outnumbered by their Franco-Spanish opponents. Final French deaths from battles and diseases in what has now become the major war of the Rif War had totaled about 8,628. On the 17th of September 1925, a squadron of American merchant vessels and flyers in the service of France bombarded Chef Chateauroux, or the Chef of Chateauroux. And yeah, America kind of took part for a little bit, but merchants. The outcome and the final push to destroy the Rif Republic. For the final attack commencing on the 8th of May 1925, the French and the Spanish had ranged at least 123,000 men, supported by 150 aircraft, against 12,000 Riffians. Superior manpower and, of course, technology at this point soon resolved the course of the war in the favor of France and Spain. The French troops pushed through from the south while the Spanish fleet and army secured Algeciras Bay by landing operations in September, the first amphibious landings in history where tanks and seaborne air support were news before the day, and began attacking from the north. After 1 year of bitter resistance, Ibn el-Krim, the leader of both the tribes, surrendered to the French authorities, and in 1926, Spanish Morocco was finally retaken yet again. However, the unpopularity of the war in Spain and the early defeats of the Spanish military contributed to the instability of the government, and the military coup of 1923 and actually spiraled into the Spanish Civil War, with one guy coming back from this war. It was Jose Joanos. Yeah, no, you know who I mean.
The narrow strait of water between Europe and Asia, one of the greatest maritime sea lanes in history.
Atrocities, murder, death, rape, and no vanilla ice cream. Beginning in 1924, the Spanish used chemical weapons during the conflict, which marked the first widespread employment of gas warfare in the post-World War I era and the interwar era. Though they might have been seen in Europe, but they were mostly used in Africa. The Spanish army indiscriminately used phosgene, disphosgene, chlorophene, and mustard gas, also against the civilian population, markets and rivers, and used a scorched earth policy of sorts, running it down on anything that could be used for Riffian hideouts, kind of like Agent Orange. Spain signed the Geneva Protocol in 1925 that prohibited the use of chemical weapons and biological weapons in international conflict, while simultaneously employing these weapons across the Mediterranean. But there's two reasons for this. They kind of stopped after this, and because the Europeans seen it as don't use this against white people, but with African colonies and stuff, maybe, depends, you know. If we don't know, you know, what we don't know won't hurt us, you know. But yeah, it was kind of like that. I'm not saying that if you use gas on the inhabitants of your colony, you won't get called out. But I'm just saying if people don't know about it, and if like one or two people voice complaints, is like, but they're brown people, you know. But you know, sometimes that happens, you know. It is the early 20th century. Look at Ethiopia, for example. Yeah, there's a lot of historical parallels, like in all wars, but this has like 4 distinct things, and we'll get to that at the end. But we're almost there.
There were far too few airplanes in this theater.
Some have cited the Spanish chemical weapons as the main reason for the widespread cancer occurrences in the Rif region, even to this day, which is still the highest in Morocco to this day. For example, according to the head of Association of Toxic Gas Victims, or the ATGV, the research has shown that there is a strong indication that the cancer is caused by the gases that were used against the resistance in the north as early as 1925. Writer Joan Pando, however, points out that the areas in France and Belgium were also gas-formed more heavily during World War I, but did not have abnormal cancer rates as well. And while he is correct, probably the lack of, you know, medical care and stuff to treat these things as early as, you know, the 20s were probably not given to the Rifian people. Even though sometimes colonies were actually better than mainland Europe itself, like Eritrea, for example, or Somalia, having more electrical lights than Italy itself, there weren't like a lot put into it, and it was mostly for the white colonialists and stuff. But he does have a point. Joan Pandro does have a point. Like, the cancer was not a thing, but then again, it was strategically, and then it was only on the battlefield. These were in population centers. They were fed into grass, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot to take into account, but he does make a point. Miguel Alonso, Alan Kramer, and Gerver Rodrigo wrote a book on the fascist warfare from 1922 to 1945, aggression, occupation, and annihilation. Although the Rif War was not a fascist war, several methods used to pacify the population were applied to the post-colonialist Reconquista of godless Republican Spain. Apart from deciding not to use chemical weapons though, Franco's campaign to cleanse Spain resembled that of Morocco and what he witnessed in Morocco. Intelligence gathering through torture, summary executions, forced labor, rape, and sadistic killing of military prisoners. Spanish mutilation of captured Moroccans were also reported, including castrations and severed heads, noses, and ears as war trophies. We'll see this in the Pacific as well, which were collected by Spanish legionnaires as war trophies and actually worn as necklace or spiked on bayonets like Vlad the Impaler. On the 9th of August 1921, the massacre of Monte Arate occurred, in which 2,000 soldiers of the Spanish army were killed after surrendering to the Monte Arate garrison near Arijo following the 12-day siege. The atrocities subsequently committed by the Spanish Army of Africa were triggered by a compulsive spirit of revenge. Of this and other massacres and desire to exact retribution on the rebel tribes for their disrespecting Spain. Now, at the end of the day, what have we learned? We've been through Vietnam, we've been through the war in Iraq, we've been through... Oh shit. Now with the Rif War, even though a small consequential colonial war, it was actually the last colonial war. It was actually the war that led Spain down the path to becoming a phalangist, far-right, and people will say fascist, but kinda dictatorship until 1975. It will lead to people like Ngomo in Equatorial Guinea to become as ruthless as his Spanish occupiers, leading to the almost near destruction of Equatorial Guinea. It will lead to the Cold War and Morocco fighting not only Spain and the Spanish colonialists from Melina and Aquia,
they would have to go pretty much blind. Chinook Beard, Anzac Cove, Canadian Cove, Newfoundland Cove, you get the picture. God awful general shit. Because Gallipoli was to
And that is the Spanish conquest of the Rif. Now, what does the Spanish conquest of the Rif have for the modern day? Well, obviously, you could see the D-Day landings of the Alchuma Bay. Basically, you could see the last colonial war. You could see Vietnam with Agent Orange and the massacre of villages and all that good stuff. You could see the colonial wars of the last half of the 1930s with Ethiopia and gas warfare. You could see the Vietnam War, which I just said. You could see the stalemate of Korea with the front being basically static until 1926 when the French came in. Which is kind of like the Chinese, right? When they came in. But for the North, but then they won. But the stalemate for that time. Anyway, you can see a lot of wars and a lot of parallels. And of course, every war has their stalemates. Every war has their Vietnam. Every country has their Vietnam. Every country has a little Korea every now and then. Every country has their last colonial war that they kind of butchered or kind of did bad, which led to independence, or even though it was crushed, led to the sense that the white man can be defeated. The Rif War, while being just probably having the title of the last colonial war, or the war, the last, I don't want to say the last colonial war, but the last colonial war that was outright not for independence, but you know what I mean, like, it was the last colonial war of the 20th century. That did not involve independence. Kinda. There was the Rif Republic. But... Anyway, to really sum up the video, I'm happy for it. I'm pretty good. I liked it. It was a pretty good. Thank you, ladies, gentlemen, and NB for watching to the end of this video. I see like an hour on here. I'm not going to be too shy and say that I did mess up a lot, but I could see a couple of scenes being not redone per se, but probably I'd say probably like, yeah, getting 45 minutes out of this. Like 15 minutes was probably, you know. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. It was a pretty interesting experience for me. I liked it. I talked a bit louder today, so hopefully that should help. And even if I'm talking a bit fast, hopefully it was not fast enough, because to go back and do all these, damn. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the last colonial war. I hope you learned something, and I hope you took away a war from the 20th century that sounds oddly familiar. Because while every country has their Vietnam, their Korea, their last colonial war, and an invasion that went horribly wrong under the wrong pretexts, the Rif War was all for and more. Vaminos, amigos, adios, and remember,
great leadership.
Why lead you the men when you could be holding, drinking, and dancing? Adios, amigos. El learn something. Alright, that's not Spanish. Anyway, popular culture though. The 1929 novel La Rafina, which was set during the Rif War, was written by the Jewish Algerian writer Alice Rojas. The action of the 1931 novel La Barendia by Pierre Mac Orlan was set during the Rif War. The novel was also turned into a movie in 1935, so 4 years later. Nice. Yeah, if you know about books and movie adaptations, they often take forever in production hell or just become Netflix. Anyway, the 1951 Hollywood film 10 Tall Men is set in the context of the Rif War. The 1999 film Legionnaire starring Jean-Claude Van Damme is set in the war in 1925, with Kamal Kifa playing Id el-Krim. The 27 miniseries, I saw this too, Morocco Love in Times of War, follows Spanish nurses during the war. So an interesting gender view of the war as well, especially as nurses, so that's interesting.
Hope you enjoyed one video.
There was also the Zani War, which is kind of similar, but with that being said, that is it for real. Anyway, learn something, and I'll see you next time. And with all this playing to, I think my cousin was making noise, so that's why my got cut out. Alright, so we'll just leave all this. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. It was supposed to be monumental and fulfilling, but in the end, it was. Thank you for watching all my crap, and I'll see you next time. Until next time, I'll learn something.
This event actually humbled him.
And
actual strategy instead of just hastily doing stuff.
Cut.
So even though you wasted thousands of lives, Winston, you saved thousands of lives and Nazi rule. So you didn't die in vain, Anzacs. Also, Canadians were there, Newfoundlanders were there, South Africans were there. Also, there was South Rhodesia, this country in the world, before tending to Zimbabwe. Of course, we got the Indians, of course. We got some Gurkhas as well, the Maoris, the Aboriginals, and you cannot forget the actual British that fought in the campaign as well. Lest we forget, and the Forgotten Army and their colonial counterparts, the French and the Senegalese Talaus, and maybe some Algerians, but mostly what we would call heat weather troops or warm climate troops. I would just coin the term now. You can use it if you want. Warm weather troops. Sorry, got spit almost. Sorry. This has been a long one for me, but it was fun. Long. Warm weather troops. So basically Australia, New Zealand, anywhere where the sun shines and you don't really get a lot of snow, I will call them warm weather troops. So troops, not troops. Sorry, I'm combining a lot of words, so that's how the vocal cords will go. Anyway, hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something, and yeah, we're gonna wrap up the Ottomans this week. Hope you enjoyed, and we're at 35 minutes. I can skip like 5 minutes of me going over. I think it was bad leadership. I was trying to have a Winston Churchill joke, and the children were screaming. So hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something. So this is my only one because it's 6 o'clock. And I normally go for my grandmother soon to help her with the groceries. So yeah, there we go. Anyway, hope you learned something.